We had some rough news when we woke up this morning that 523 Quebec Sierra had an accident last night. 6 people on board, 1 casualty. So being that was a citation latitude, that hit kind of close to home for me. I'm a 680 pilot as well here in Austin, Texas. So that aircraft was actually flying into my home airport, my home FBO. And as you can imagine, I've gotten a lot of questions about it, and everybody's curious about what happened, including me. So I spent the entire day analyzing the Adsb data, talking to all my sources at the ATC, talking to people at NetJets, talking to people at FBOs, and trying to piece together as much information as I can. And I'm just going to go ahead and try to share it with you guys. So let's talk about what the Adsb data revealed to me. I'll put up some visuals for you as well, but basically what I saw in the Adsb data is that they began a descent from cruise altitude, and they decided to try to land at Laredo Airport. They arrived at Laredo Airport high and fast. They had plenty of energy. He was 8 miles away from Laredo at 18,000 feet or something along those lines. And he opted to extend out, make a right turn 270 back to a final approach and try to land on runway 36 right. The data reveals that upon getting turned back towards the runway after that 270-degree turn, that he didn't have adequate energy to make it to the runway. And that leads me to believe that he opted for the highway because he had no thrust. If he had no thrust, the most likely scenario is he had no fuel. If he had no fuel, we can all speculate, but this is a very smart aircraft that has a lot of checks and balances in place to make sure that we never run out of fuel. So we have to question then, did he have a fuel leak? Did he have a malfunction? Did he have some sort of mechanical failure that led to this loss of thrust? But the data indicates to me that he had thrust, probably during the 270-degree turn, and sometime along the rolling out to final, I believe he lost thrust. And that's evident because he was at a pretty appropriate distance and altitude for a 3-degree glide path, which is standard, and he opted to turn towards the highway and go land on the highway instead, and landed still a couple miles short of the runway. So he would not have had adequate energy to get to the runway based on what I'm seeing there. And the only explanation for that and not adding power that I can think of right now is that he didn't have engines running. And that may be wrong, and maybe there's a million ways it could have gone down. It could have been stuck throttle levers or engine stuck in idle due to a mechanical malfunction. We don't know exactly. But this concerning part is reports from ATC that are off the record are saying that they reported minimum fuel or low fuel in flight, in cruise. And they reported that they had 1,700 pounds of fuel, which is plenty to get to Laredo from where they reported that. But it's all concerning that they would report low fuel in the first place, and that it would have snuck up on them in any kind of way, shape, or form, because this aircraft would be warning you the entire time that you don't have adequate fuel to make it to Austin, if that was your intended destination and in the flight plan. So more questions than answers right now, but I just wanted to point out that the Adsb data does lead me to believe there's a loss of thrust, and I can only speculate as to why. All right, let me talk real quick about these graphics I created based off Adsb data. The 2 most important ones to me are the height versus distance to the runway. And this shows the altitude, distance to the Laredo Airport, and it also shows, it kind of gives you an indication of the rate of descent because it's showing distance and time. And it also shows a very distinct moment in the flight where there was a pretty large change in energy. And so the aircraft speed went from 165 to 135, and that's when it became evident that they weren't going to have enough energy to make it to the runway, and they shortly thereafter turned towards the highway and landed on the highway. And that could be a number of different things. It could have just been configuration change. Maybe they were in clean configuration, thought they had the runway made and then configured and realized they didn't. It could have been complete or partial loss of power. Maybe they were on one engine and it went to zero. Maybe they had two engines and it went to zero. Maybe there was some other mechanical failure that resulted in loss of thrust. But what is indicative to me is a loss of thrust preventing them from making it to the runway, because they were very near a standard glide path when they made the decision to move to the highway. And that means that they were 100% certain they weren't going to make the runway, and they were 100% correct, and they opted for the next best thing, which was the highway. And ultimately it saved some lives. I'm not going to speculate how we got here in the first place or the decisions they made, leading up to that, but that decision to land on the highway saved some lives, as opposed to landing in the darkness of Laredo, Texas on a field or whatever you can't see below you. The other graphic is the right 270, and this one's pretty hard to defend as a pilot. The right 270 was an attempt to lose altitude, and these graphics go together because you can see the correlation of the losing altitude, descending aggressively in the 270 turn. They were too high to make it to the runway as a straight in left base, so he made a right turn 270 to a final, and he executed the turn fine. It looks good on, from overhead. He made the 270s, lined up really nicely on 3/6 right. For all intents and purposes, it could have gone really well if he had thrust. And I believe in my heart of hearts that his thrust situation changed during that 270. So I think he either had one engine or both engines during the beginning of that 270 and believed that he was going to have thrust all the way to the runway and planned accordingly. And I will say that I believe somewhere around 6 miles or so, he lost thrust and lost the ability to make that runway on a 3-degree glide path. Had he known that he was going to be without thrust, and this is all speculation, I don't even know if he was without thrust, but that's the only reason I can make sense of it. That's the only way I can make sense of it, that he would land on a highway instead of just adding power, right? If you had power to add, you would add power and make it to the runway. But that didn't happen. He opted for the highway, which indicates no thrust. So in hindsight, an armchair quarterback, he should have came over the top of the airport and done a 360 overhead and kept the runway underneath him as long as possible and judged his altitude while configured and landed right over Laredo. As they got a really nice long runway there, it would have been a perfect opportunity for that kind of thing. Again, hindsight's 2020. He may not have even been aware that he was going to lose thrust, and we don't know. But the 270 I don't like. He went from 8 miles from the airport, and during the turn he went all the way to 16 miles from the airport, resulting in a glide path that was too far from the airport to make it without thrust, ultimately resulting in them landing on the freeway. So very soon we'll have the information we need to stop all the speculation, and I'm guilty myself. We're all going to speculate. People want closure, people want knowledge, people want safety. I spent the entire day looking for that closure to try to understand what happened, and I would suspect in a week or two we'll know, because we're going to get the information from the FADEC. The engine computers will tell the whole story. Were they running? Were they not? Was there any anomalies in the engines? What was going on? Was there any problem with thrust or power? The ATC tapes, I think, are going to reveal that they were in fact low on fuel and declaring an emergency, or at least minimum fuel, in order to expedite their processing into Laredo. The cockpit voice recorder will tell us the absolute most about the pilot's knowledge of if there was a fuel problem. Did the pilots know about it? I'm really hoping that this is a fuel leak that just was undetected until it was too late. If it does turn out to be fuel, I'm hoping it was a fuel leak or something like that was outside of the control of everybody involved. But we will know soon enough, and we'll have to look at the fuel order in Cabo and see if the fuel order was mixed up. and see if the FMS and computers were working properly on the aircraft. And we need to check the truck for contamination, see if there's any other reports. And then of course we would have to figure out why contamination would take so long to activate. So there's a lot more questions than answers right now, and I hate speculating around it. And more than anything, I think we need to be thankful for the safety of the 5 people that survived this crash, and let's give them some space to mourn and experience their process. And as soon as I get more information, I'll report back, and we'll try to make sure that this never happens again.